Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Sales Excellence series that we have here at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. I'm your host, Deva Rangarajan, and today we actually have two very interesting perspectives from across the pond, across the Atlantic, from Denmark, where we have an academic, Dr. Karina Bergdorf Jensen, as well as we have Ms. Ella Kaspersen from Danfoss, which is a big global manufacturer of pumps and other industrial equipment as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.
You're welcome
for having us.
Now, let me begin with Karina. I think one of the things that we'll all be curious is to see that there's a lot of things happening in the world right now. There's a lot of changes happening because of COVID. There's a lot of things happening because of digital transformation. And of course, COVID giving rise to faster digital transformation in companies as well. So, but before we had all this, Karina, from your perspective, what were some of the things that you were beginning to see happening in the world of business to business customers?
Well, thank you for having me. I just need to clarify one thing.
Yeah.
You're kind enough to call me doctor. I'm not a doctor yet. I haven't defended my PhD thesis, so so for right now it's Mrs.
Yeah,
or just Karina. Yes,
yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah.
But anyway, so in Denmark, I think we have one of the highest digitalization rates of the world.
Yeah.
And a very nice infrastructure of broadbands and internet. So we've been quite digitalized before the COVID-19 happened. However, we do see a lot of things happening with COVID, as we were not able to do the one-on-one or two-on-two meetings in face-to-face, just like everybody else in the world. We had issues with that. So interesting enough, we have a lot of B2B companies that are working within the service sectors that are suffering from this. But I think what I find most interesting right now is that actually a lot of companies that are not directly influenced by shutdowns, but who are heavy industries, who have purely B2B business relations, are not suffering and are actually some of them thriving. I know of companies who've had some of their best sales years in 2020, which I find quite interesting. And the most important thing, which I heard you talk about this with someone else before, is that this idea that the face-to-face meeting was necessary for someone to do complex B2B sales turns out that it might not be entirely true. We have some great cases in Denmark of companies mastering to do the whole sales process from the very first contact and finishing off some of the complex sales and solution sales in this framework of just meeting online. So we see that. So I think we're pretty much like everybody else, but I think we may have had an advantage to some countries with the fact that we have such a great infrastructure on the technological side. But having said that, we've also been in a situation where the B2B and the B2G has been very digitalized for quite some years. I mean, almost no transactions with the official Denmark takes place without some form of digitalizing tools. But the B2B has been lacking. And mostly because we've been telling ourselves that we can't build relationship online.
This is fantastic. Let me ask you, essentially this is from a perspective where you talk about broadly based on your interaction with a lot of executives as well. Let me ask Ella out here, is that from your perspective, now that, do you find the same thing when you talk to your sales organization? Because it could be that you're in such a niche that the findings from what Karina is saying might or might not be applicable. So tell us about your thoughts from your perspective.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Karina. I think that the digitalization, at least in Denmark and large parts of Europe, are ready for this, but the people haven't been necessarily. That what we see is that when it's a necessity, people will do it. So there was no other way. we started taking the calls on Skype or Teams or whatever, first internally, but then also with customers. Things like, I've seen it, a funny fact actually, that over the past 3 years I've been working with lots of salespeople all over Europe, and when we've had Skype meetings or team meetings, nobody was willing to use the camera, sort of hiding a little, right? But all of a sudden during COVID, everybody's using the camera. We have to, if we want to look people in the eye and if we want to have a little more social contact. So it's just these things can make the world change so fast because there's no other choice. And I really think that that is the part here, that it would have taken us 10, 15, maybe even 20 years more to start looking at the virtual sale. And I'm sure that it is about can we create the relationships, not meeting people, and therefore definitely the camera is one of the very important things for doing that.
Yeah.
But we also see that I mean, that you can cover more distance. You can you save traveling time, and I mean, time is one of the key resources today that we all lack. So to me, this has been an eye-opener for a lot of people, and including myself, that actually you can do more if the intent and the willingness to do that is there.
Yeah.
And in these circumstances, it has been.
Actually, let me build on that to you, Helle, is that one of the things that we hear, and that is a challenge that a global organization like yours faces, is that you talked about Europe, right? But I'm sure that a significant portion of your business is also in other parts of the world.
Oh, yeah.
And when you talk about this, how do you, as an organization, manage that kind of variance? Because at the end of the day, is that not everything can be smooth, but you also need to manage that variance. So how do you try as an organization and manage that variance in the readiness of your organization to meet with the challenges of what COVID is throwing? And I say this because things I think are going to get back to normal a little bit, but once people have gotten the idea of doing things virtually, you're probably going to go from 5 meetings face to face to maybe 2 meetings face to face. And that, you see what I mean? So I think it's going to be still, people would still like to see each other for some time, at least for some time. So my question is that, how do you try to manage this across the whole world?
Yeah, we try not to be very global in our approach. I mean, of course we want to be global, but at the same time act local, as we say. Right. So we have local entities supporting sales. So we try to adjust to the local culture and to also, I mean, what is a breadband capabilities in the area. There are lots of different things to consider when you look at the world as a whole. So of course we need to be adjustable and flexible to the different areas of the world. So there will be changes. But for the COVID, we've also seen that once it started in China, we have factories in China. They closed down. Everybody else was running as usual. And then when it started hitting Europe, we could see they were recovering in China all of a sudden, going to the States, and then China was back on track. So it's actually been, we can see kind of into the future a little, because the way that it has traveled with the COVID, just one incident. So in that sense, of course, we have to adjust, but we can learn, we can use knowledge from other parts of the world, of course.
Let me build on that to Karina right now, because I think a significant part of this, what you're talking about right now, has got to do with not just the reliance on sales, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're going to find increasingly, our research shows that marketing and sales integration has never been as important as it is right now. Because in my experience, if you go to a typical B2B organization, if I ask what is marketing, it's typically Marcom, or marketing communication, or I've heard things like marketing is a black hole, money goes in, nothing concrete ever comes out. Marketing spends all the money that we work so hard to bring in. This is from sales, right? So from that perspective, right, Karina, what are you observing in terms of the reliance on marketing and sales to work together to meet with the challenges an organization faces?
Yeah, see, and now we're moving a little bit out of the COVID thing because I think this has been
Yes,
going on
absolutely.
for a longer time. And actually, I'm working on a project right now that addresses the point where you go from a marketing team to a sales team, the actual place of crossover. So just to give you an example of some of the things we see. First of all, I think it's in Denmark, largely we still have marketing and sales teams.
Yeah.
So at least in the SMVs and in the larger companies, right? So in the very small, more agile companies, it might be different, but we do have marketing and sales teams. So there is a type of collaboration that needs to work. In that perspective, one of the challenges that I've noticed in this new research project is the disalignment between the purchasing journey and the sales process journey, right? So once marketing kind of works the market and starts to do campaigns or create awareness and interacts online and kind of takes over, this has been known for years, takes over a larger amount of the buying process or the buying journey. They kind of move into the sphere of the sales organization or the sales team. What has happened though is the way that the sales team approach a lead or at the point of handover of a lead that's been worked and matured in that process, it seems like the sales team is almost treating every lead in the same way, regardless of where they are at what point of the sales journey. So a major point of at least in this research that comes across is that there's a lack of knowledge of where the buyer has been in his journey, how many steps has he gone through, and each lead is treated equally. Which is a major problem, and that leads to sales having reactions like, these leads are not as good as the ones we create ourselves, because they treat them in a way that is maybe not aligned with the way they are in the purchasing journey. So you now contact a person or two different leads in one day, and one has gone significantly further in their buying process, but you don't know that because you don't have the information from the marketing team. So you get the first lead and they're significantly further, they're ready to make a decision, but then you get the other lead that has not gone through as much online, but it's still ready to be handed over. You treat that the same way. It might seem like this lead is bad, right? So the information and the coordination of systems, I mean, it makes me wonder why most CRM systems in Denmark is something for the sales team. The marketing team never touches the CRM system. And we know now from Google Analytics, for example, or other resources that we have in marketing, exactly where the customer has been, what they've done, how far they are in their journey. And we also can, based on the big data and the data we have, predict a little bit about how likely they then are to go either way in a buying process, B2B, right? But that information is cut off or lost when it's transferred into just as a lead with contacts, and this is what they're interested in, into the CRM system. So that's one of the major things I think we see here is the information is lost.
Indeed. Well, actually, I want to build on that to LS. Is that based on that? So building on what Karina was saying, and I think as an organization, how are you facing this? Because if your salespeople are not able to visit your customers, you need your marketing campaigns or marketing collateral webinars. I'm sure that you have a lot of webinars done to attract, and you personalize the content of the webinars to attract people as well. But the success of all that depends upon your sales organization following up on it. So that's what I want to ask you about. How are you doing it?
And I think actually it goes a little back to what Karina said also about this handing over and the terminology used.
Yeah.
Now I've been implementing CRM systems a few times also in my experience, or in my past
Yeah.
experience. And the thing is, if you look at the sales process, it is a inside out perspective. So you're talking about the customers, they are a lead because you just found them, then you qualify them, then you call them a qualified lead, and then so you don't know where the customer is, but you know how far you have come. But maybe you don't get the customer on board there. And if you then have both marketing who has their different descriptions of their tasks, and then you have sales with theirs, nobody understands, they don't share maybe the terminology there, and then everything is inside out. Then they don't talk about where is the customer in his buying process, but they talk about where are we in our process. And this is, I think, a big part of that confusion. So we actually did change a few years ago and changed all our wording on that. So now we discuss where is the customer, and you can do different things to a customer in a specific stage depending on what is needed. But everybody have to approach the customer at the point where he is, so nothing is lost. So I think that is actually an important thing, that we have been putting people into boxes suiting our activities rather than the other way around. And with the right customer focus in sales, that is really, really important. We have to change that.
Indeed. And this is for you, Ella, is that from my experience, and this is something where I've had my dissertation titled 18 years ago was how Salesforce automation, if not thought about strategically, gives rise to more headache to sales managers and salespeople rather than help them. It seems that not much has changed since then in terms of the over-reliance on technology to solve everything. And I think the fact is that, and that's something that I want to ask your perspective, and what has your organization done? So one of the things you said was maybe having the same vocabulary, right? But the processes have changed, because in my opinion, it is when processes change. Now, irrespective of whether the process has changed because your top management thinks it has to change, or if the customer is changing, or things like an exogenous shock like COVID is going to change processes, right? Yeah. Now, and the key to all this is understanding that process. To what extent is the process at the core of any fundamental change within an organization like yours? Because if you don't get that right, your people are not going to follow. So I would like your opinion on that one.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think the process is of course important, and if you want change in behavior, you need to change something. Otherwise, that behavior will probably not change. So you can change the process, or you can change the way you use it. What we did was to change the process, and then work with our salespeople around that to have them rethink why we did different things. Did we do it just to tick boxes in a system, or did we do it because we could see that it made sense to the customer and brought value to the customer? So I think that has been from the inside out perspective to the outside in, that has been, so that I think is really important. And of course, you also mentioned top management. When you want change, you need the top management on board. You need them to push, because otherwise also the change is gonna be a slow thing to see happening. Definitely.
Karin, let me ask you this. So essentially, it sounds like from what Ella was saying within her organization is that the process was, part of the process is also just having a common vocabulary, right? Because from my experience, the common vocabulary for me, when I worked with an organization which was global, it took us 18 months to have a consensus on what a particular term would be across the world. Now, I'm not talking about one region, right? Now, so essentially, when you talk about it, what do you observe? Do you see that, do you have to be an organization the size of Danfoss to actually have the resources and have the people saying, we're going to have this organization that's going to actually, like DBS, I'm assuming that's Danfoss Business Solutions or systems to actually have a set of very smart full-time employees actually looking at this and helping the organization? But what are other organizations doing, in your opinion, to try and address the same issue? Because this is extremely critical, right?
this is extremely critical, and I think there's a couple of layers to that question. One is that I do believe, and I do experience that. So I think you do too, Helle. I think I heard you say that at some point at least, that there has been a movement. I mean, sales is a lot more strategic in the in Danish B2B businesses today than it was just 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Something is happening so that companies are now taking it a lot more seriously, and we're talking about it on a much larger scale. So for that reason alone, more companies are moving into these discussions and are trying to work on it. Then there's the fact that we only just 2 years ago started the first academic sales programs in Denmark. At that time at Copenhagen Business School. Now we have one at Aalborg Business School as well. But so we have two sales programs. So we are still just in the beginning phase of educating young future executives to into this new train of thought. That then means that a lot of the companies we're working with, we still have, and I'm probably going to be hanged for saying this, but very old-fashioned and very traditional sales leaders who are not there. And I see no correlation between the size of the company and the ability of the salespeople to have this. It's more of a, if you are lucky enough to have in your company someone who has that mindset of customer centricity, sales enablement, who are interested in looking at things from outside in perspective instead of the other way around, then the organization starts to move. If you have enough, and if you of course have the corporate buy-in, that's necessary
always
as well. But if your sales manager or your sales team is led by someone who is very traditional and who still believes that it's all about, just making a buck right here, right now, and that very traditional way of going into sales, then you probably won't. And I don't see that it's a size issue. It's more of a mindset issue, if you ask me.
Love it. But for me, that's a whole point, right? And now my question is to Ella, is from a corporate space, right? So essentially, it's great to talk about mindset. It's great to talk about top management buy-in, but a significant part of this ability to do this is one, your middle management, that is your sales managers' ability to form that layer between top management and people on the ground. Number one, if you're publicly listed, I can easily see where top management's priority is going to be, unfortunately. Not because they have bad intentions, it's just unfortunately that's the way things are dictated. Now, my question to you is the following. When you're going through times of change like this, or I think moving forward with technology evolving, we're always going to have a constant state of flux in terms of what's going to happen in terms of changing and everything else. So my question to you is that how do you enable the next generation of managers if you do not have the luxury of what some companies or some countries have, which have actually had sales education at the university level to a point where managers have gone through sufficient number of years to be able to understand the importance of all this. So how do you reconcile this? How do you enable your managers to be out there, to be those change agents?
Yeah, and I think Danfoss is a privately owned company. It's a family-owned company, so it's a huge luxury for us, right? That there is consistency and there is a will to invest in the company and in the people as well. I think another part is also that we are a creative company, not like Lego, but engineering, and there is also a lot of creativity around and wish to improve all the time. We have this continuous improvement is part of our DNA, I think, in Danfoss. So that is definitely part of it. But that's also part of our job in DBS, that we actually support and train sales training for salespeople, but also with the managers. Our HR people are also looking at this area, and we try to sort of bridge the efforts there. So one of the things we introduced some years ago was also sales coaching.
Mm.
So I'm a certified coach, and I've been training sales leaders in coaching in our company, and at the same time supporting them. So that has also been a fantastic journey where we really have seen it's like an extra gear that you have when you do these things, that the sustainability of the new projects, of the processes and of the mindset is much harder when you can bring this coaching on board, because also it's not just 3 days fix, it's a 6 months ongoing relationship
Absolutely,
with
indeed.
somebody.
Mm. Indeed. That actually brings me, so Karina, one of the things that I've heard, again, this is, now I'm not talking about one particular organization. So the one thing that I've heard a lot, of course, is organizations have good intentions. So this is where I've learned a lot from singer Madonna, where she says the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Is that we all have good intentions, but unfortunately, coaching is that, it's that billion-dollar thing, right? So essentially, companies insist on coaching, but if I were to ask sales managers the question, how much time do you actually spend coaching? Usually the numbers are not very favorable. I'm not saying this of every organization, because I've heard some organizations which do a fantastic job of insisting on coaching. So from your perspective, how many of the companies that you talk to actually do and emphasize on the importance of coaching to evaluate a sales manager?
Well, coaching of the sales manager
No.
or by the
Coaching,
sales manager? Yeah,
because
by,
they're two different things. Because,
I just needed to understand
yeah,
it
yeah.
right. Yeah. So I would say that most every company I talk to will say they do it a lot.
Mm.
But I would also say that when I then talk to them one-on-one, it is I mean, time is the most important resource. Helle said
Yes.
it earlier, right?
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time, and I would say sales managers are not often the ones that get to do it a lot. They might go on a visit, a couple of times with some of the customers. If they have some of the sales process that is done by inside sales teams, they might do that. But my experience is that actually only the companies that have dedicated coaches, like something like you have at Danfoss Services, Helle, right? Or the HI team really get to do it a lot. I mean, the sales manager has too many other obligations.
Yeah.
So time becomes a resource. In most companies, you need a dedicated coach for it, unless it's sales coaching on a much lower level. I'm talking about of course, in telemarketing businesses that are selling things, the call centers like that, they do it more often, because that's basically the job of the sales manager in that setting. But for the complex B2B organizations, I would recommend having someone dedicated to doing it, because otherwise it's not getting done. But then, as we talk of technology, more and more technologies are getting being introduced that are helping with that. So AI technology that will listen in on conversations and coach live while you're talking is kind of is starting to come into the market. They're not quite at the level where you can use it in very complex sales situations yet, but I think it's only a matter of time before that might be a reality. And then, if we have more of the sales meetings online, then that would make it possible for the AI bots to listen in on it, which is not necessarily possible if you're sitting, on a chair in Austria having a meeting, or somewhere in Denmark. Yes.
Love it. So actually, I only have two questions, but again, it could be depending upon the answers, if I branch into a couple of things, but in the interest of time, because what you're saying, Karina, and I think that's, now I'm going to bring it back to Ella, is what you said was what we hear in companies which are realizing that your sales managers unfortunately do not have the time all the time. They have the intention, but they might not have the time. And one of the companies that I've heard had a very interesting thing where they said that a sales manager will not get his or her variable commission till 80% of other 100% of their team hits 80% of their targets. Very interesting. So essentially, where they said, which forcing your sales managers. But what this company did, which I thought was brilliant, and that's where I want to understand what Danfoss might be doing, is they actually created a sales operations teams. What is a sales operation team? Essentially what you have is that all the kind of things that a manager today, if you said CRM is hard, CRM is really hard, because if I were to ask a salesperson, if you want to have one file about your customer, how long does it take for you to prepare? And the answer I get is incredible. 2 to 3 hours just to get, if I have to be prepared for a call. So imagine the life of a sales manager if he or she has to have a report that takes a look at it and coach the people. So they have business operations team whose main job is whatever file you use, I mean, whatever system that you use to come up with a one pager or a two pager or okay, pager, one slider or things like that, that can be used by a sales manager to coach the sales team. So my question is, are you doing things like that in terms of supporting the sales manager to actually be efficient in coaching? Because you see what I mean? Yes, you can train them to coach, but at the end of the day, they need access to this information to be able to have a meaningful conversation. That's one question I actually have for Ella.
Yeah, we developed two kind of coachings for the sales managers, where the tools that we already use deliver information for them. So it's for them to have, we call it factual or fact-based. Of course, it's not, because the people who enter this information, there's still some kind of subjectivity to it, but at least there is something that it comes out of a system that they can then use as a background for the coaching. And discuss what was the thinking when that was decided and done and so on. Yes. So we had to develop these two concepts for it to.
So one is, of course, how do I do this coaching? But the question is that what numbers or what facts am I going to be using to doing that coaching?
Yeah. What am I coaching to is what we call it. Yeah.
Indeed. Now, Karina, let me ask you this. So essentially, we are talking about a lot of things. And in the interest of time, this is the last question where I would get both of your perspectives on this. We've talked a lot, right? We've talked about how people have to change. We've talked about the process, outside in kind of stuff. Now, when this happens, right, and we do not touch, I usually do not like to very specifically sales enablement, digital transformation, because all of it boils down to people, process. And the last one, which for me is very, very important, is performance, right? Is we have to, of course, say that, yeah, we understand all of this is changing. But my question to you is, in your experience, how has the way salespeople have been measured, or how has the performance measures changed, or have they changed at all in a B2B setting? And I'm not restricting it to COVID. I'm restricting it to best business practice.
Yeah.
Have you seen that happen? And that same question is going to come to you, Ella, after this. Essentially. So that's sort of,
I would say that Scandinavians and Danish people are Scandinavians, of course, are probably a little bit in the forefront in democratizing, workplaces in general. And you would think that would spill over until more open and more shared team-based performance criteria and KPIs, for example. And we do see that within certain companies. I would say I see it primarily in the changes in this performance measurements are happening in larger international companies or companies that have a very broad outside or scope outside Denmark or outside Europe even. But in general, this is a point for improvement in Danish B2B companies. Most companies are still measuring by, how many contacts do you have, the things you have in your CRM system, how far along are you in the sales process, what is the proposed deal size, all of these things that we are still measuring. And then we do have some companies that are trying to move out from that, trendsetters, larger companies, but in general, needs improvement.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that and then ask another question. Is that we see at least the awareness that we have to move, especially when we go from inside out to outside in, customer-centric organizations, that sometimes that the kind of solutions that we sell might take a little bit longer to sell. The sales cycle time might get a little bit longer. So essentially the traditional ways of just looking at revenues and margins, especially when you move more towards complex solutions, would require much more activity-based performance measures. Now, to what extent is that something that happens within. So essentially with you, it's much more specific, but building up on what I asked. So the performance, how was that changed in Danfoss?
Yeah, I think probably our solutions are they are technical, and it's not just one product, but it is a solution. So there are lots of stakeholders with the customers. There are lots of stakeholders in Danfoss. I think to us, selling is a team sport. And then how many people are on the team, and definitely we can extend the team. No doubt about that, to include the marketing department, as you talked on earlier. Definitely there can be better usage and more sharing of information there, and which is also what is building up these days. We are getting closer, I think, and also with the customer centricity. I mean, everybody, most people in a company has some kind of relation to the customer or customer-facing activities. So logistics people are also part of the sales, you could say, right? And the management is, of course, finance. Lots of people who are not necessarily thought of as sales supporters in any way, but that is in fact what they are. And I think in Danish we have this saying that the chain is not stronger than the weakest part. Link. And I think that is what goes for sale, that in the organization everybody needs to understand the customer and think about what they need, and then share information, and that needs a place then to be shared for everybody, because as the complexity grows with a number of stakeholders, this is going to be a huge task to maintain.
And what I'm realizing right now is that as I talk, when you mentioned that you're family held, that some of the best practices that I'm beginning to see for global organizations are coming from family held companies, because they have a completely different perspective than every quarter where they have to report their earnings, so that their shareholders can decide what is going to be the stock price. And that kind of also looks into a long-term focus on looking at performance measures and how that is going to play a big role in how we evaluate salespeople. So thank you so much, Karina and Ella, for sharing some of your insights. And I'm really glad that even though we began by talking about sales enablement, that we do not talk about technology, but we talked about what constitutes sales enablement, that is the people, process, and performance. This is what, in my opinion, is what is key, that we should not forget that part. Technology is an enabler. But if you don't have the process that is going to be changing, if you do not have the right kind of people on board, including people, salespeople and managers and marketing folks and finance folks, all of them working together, you're not going to get the performance that we need as well. So thank you so much for bringing both a perspective from an academician as well as from what is happening on the field as well.
I would like to
thank welcome.
You. Absolutely. And folks, stay tuned. We will be having the next webinar, which is actually focusing on performance-based metrics for using salespeople, especially in complex sales situations.